In just a few minutes, the top two candidates will debate to win your vote.
Watch our pre- and post-debate coverage of CNN's presidential debate right here on The Nation Decides, starting now.
We're just moments away from watching the first debate in this election between the top two candidates, President Joe Biden and former President Donald Trump.
4 years ago, they shared the stage under a unique set of rules. They couldn't shake hands for one. It wasn't allowed at the time as the pandemic gripped the nation.
And here we are, a new election year and rematch under another unique set of circumstances in what could be a pivotal moment for both candidates. I'm Steve Lance.
And I'm Tiffany Meier.
And this is The Nation Decides. We've got a great show for you tonight in our pre- and post-debate analysis of the CNN presidential debate, which you can watch on CNN or simulcast right here on NTD News starting at 9 p.m.
And stick around after the debate to watch the second half of our show as we dive into what was said and the biggest moments of the night. You don't want to miss it.
And here with us at the desk is very special guest Gerard Felitti, political strategist and senior counsel at the Lawfare Project.
And before we hear what we're expecting tonight, we've got NTD's Dave Martin at the Data Hub. Dave, another big night. What's going to make this debate different?
Thank you, Tiff. Yeah, there should be a number of different things tonight. Now, since tonight's debate was not organized by the Commission on Presidential Debates, which has organized every presidential debate since 1988, it's going to be a slightly different format with slightly different rules. Let's go over them right here. First rule of the night, candidates cannot talk with their campaign staff. Now, this is going to be a 90-minute debate with 2 commercial breaks, but at no time can they confer with their staff to go over their responses or whatever. Second rule, coin flip determined the podium positions. Now, Biden already won this. He actually had the option to do the final closing argument. Instead, he chose the podium on the right. So Trump will be on the viewer's left, but he will get the final say. Rule number 3, mics muted, except of course when it's a candidate's turn to speak. Now the candidates each get 2 minutes for answers, 1 minute for rebuttals, though the moderators can grant some extra time at their discretion. Now the fourth rule, no pre-written notes. Basically all they're going up there with is a pen, a pad of paper, and a bottle of water. And finally, the fifth one, they must meet CNN's 15% polling threshold. Now, CNN actually had several thresholds, but this 15% one right here eliminated everybody for this debate except for Trump and Biden. And that includes Robert F. Kennedy Jr., former Democrat turned independent. Now, let's see where Kennedy is actually polling along with Trump and Biden. As you can see right here, this is the polling averages for the top 3 candidates. This is according to Real Clear Politics for a 3-week period ending on June 20. As you can see here, Trump and Biden right around 41%, while Kennedy well back at 7.5%. That's roughly half of CNN's threshold. Now, in response, Kennedy just decided to have his own debate live at 9 o'clock tonight, where he will answer the same questions that the candidates are answering, except his will be done with a live studio audience, unlike what Trump and Biden will have. Now that's it for the rules. Back to you guys at the desk.
Dave, great reporting as always. Thank you for that.
And now we'll go to the White House, where we have NTD White House correspondent Iris Tao standing by. Good evening, Iris. How have President Biden and former President Trump been preparing leading up to the debate tonight?
Good evening to all of you. So the two candidates have taken very different approaches when it comes to debate prep. And President Biden, who met with his supporters earlier today in Atlanta, spent the past week in Camp David poring over policy votes and holding mock debate sessions with one of his advisors playing former President Trump. And meanwhile, Trump has also held informal policy sessions, but instead has taken a much more informal approach, staying mostly active on the campaign trail, saying that he's been preparing for this debate for his whole life, and that last-minute cramming wouldn't really help. Meanwhile, President Biden's campaign today says that Biden will tonight focus on issues like abortion to target Trump, and also he's going to lay out his past achievements throughout the past 2 years and also draw a clear contrast with his 2024 rival. Watch.
I want you to hear Joe's words, but most of all, I want you to listen to his heart.
There'll be millions of Americans watching. He takes that opportunity very seriously. Making sure we're giving Americans a little bit of breathing room and not giving tax cuts to billionaires.
So President Biden is expected to highlight issues such as abortion, Medicaid and Medicare, as well as immigration, especially after his recent restrictions on asylum claims that have led to a sharp drop in illegal crossings at the southern border. Meanwhile, Trump is expected to also focus on immigration, but also on issues such as illegal immigration and also such as crime and inflation. And meanwhile, just this week, the judge in Trump's New York case actually partially lifted Trump's gag order, now allowing him to talk about the jurors and witnesses in this case, such as Michael Cohen and Stormy Daniels. So a big thing to watch for tonight will be how former President Trump as well as President Biden address this unprecedented conviction. Back to you.
NTD's Iris Tal live at the White House. We'll be going back to Iris throughout the night for updates and reports.
And with all the background now out of the way, we can get back to our guest who has been waiting very patiently, Gerard Filitti, political strategist and senior counsel at the Lawfare Project. Thank you so much for being with us here tonight. What are you expecting tonight from the candidates?
Well, there's a lot to expect. Joe Biden has to explain what he's done in the last 4 years that warrants being reelected, and he has to outline a future for the next 4 years, something that we have not really seen so far. We've seen the same types of discussions that he's had in campaign speeches, but there's no real meat there. Donald Trump, same thing. He has to address why he is a better choice, what vision he has, what will be different under his administration, while at the same time, both candidates have to address in some manner the questions about their age and their capacity to continue and serving the country at this point in time.
And Gerard, as Dave mentioned over at the big screen there, the rules are a little bit different this time around. The mics are going to be muted. Who do you think that this will benefit, and how does this change the dynamic?
This may actually end up benefiting Donald Trump. When he does not speak to a large crowd, when he doesn't have that excitement, he is more focused, more dedicated to what he's saying, more attentive to what he's saying. So he may come across as more presidential than he has in previous debates. So this may be an advantage to him.
Now, polls are noting that undecided voters or independent voters are key to this year's election. What do you see them looking out for in tonight's debate?
Well, that's a tough question because the biggest class of undecided voters are Generation Z. They're the young kids who are now of voting age who are turned off by both parties. In the last election, more of them voted for Biden than for Trump. This year, this election, you see a narrowing of the gap. So where the candidates really need to focus are on the youth vote. So they will be looking for education strategy. They will be looking for answers to questions about abortion, social issues, and what's going on in America domestically. You also look at independents who haven't made up their minds yet. They will be looking probably at the economy. That's the number one issue everyone looks at.
Speaking of the independents, a recent NPR PBS News Mayor's poll found that Biden has moved up in his standing with independent voters. What do you see President Biden doing well so far, and what does the campaign need to continue doing well to make sure those voters turn out in November?
Well, first, I think with this election especially, but with all elections, when you're looking at polls this early, they're not reliable. They give you a sense of what people are thinking at that moment. There's no way to actually track what they're changing in their perspective. But what Biden is doing is he is appearing presidential. He is the president. He's coming out with policy pronouncements. He has now a new policy for immigration that was talked about earlier. He's coming out with ideas, and that independence is something that they want to see.
We're getting word right now that President Biden has arrived at the venue in Atlanta, the CNN studio, where there will be no live audience. Another wrinkle to the debate tonight. So we're just getting word that the president is there, and we'll bring the debate to you as soon as it does come at 9 p.m. Gerard, I want to get your thoughts. The latest Quinnipiac poll has Trump with a slight lead over Biden nationally. That's at 49% compared to Biden's 45%. What does Trump need to do to ensure enough voters turn out in November?
Well, he needs to have, it's not even about what he does at this debate. It's about having the strong party apparatus, which has been in place. The Republican Party, the GOP, is doing much better this time at having voter mobilization, get out the drive efforts. And unlike other elections, they're pushing the idea that people need to vote earlier. So Donald Trump basically needs to stay consistent with what the party is doing, not discredit early voting, not discredit mail-in voting, and stick to a plan that will actually get people out.
And right now on screen, we are seeing the CNN location for the presidential debate tonight. Of course, that is in Atlanta, Georgia. So that is a live feed coming to us. That is where President Biden and former President Trump are going to be facing off. This is the first time a current and former president have ever debated. Now, historically, this has led to weaker first debate performances for the incumbent. How do you see that playing out tonight, Gerard?
Now, we are in unprecedented times. So we have two candidates who've gone at it before, not to very popular results, if you may, because people had criticisms on the performance of both during the debates, more so Trump. This time, I think we will see pretty much the same thing. We want to see their temperament. And I don't think that benefits Trump or Biden at this point, because Biden's coming in this well-rested from, the same as he did presumably for the State of the Union. Donald Trump is also coming this with a different attitude. He has been campaigning differently for the last 2 weeks, employing a different strategy. So I don't think this will be anything like what we've seen before.
We're going to leave the discussion right here for now. The CNN presidential debate is just moments away. Watch it all on CNN or simulcast right here on NTD News. We'll be right back with our pre-debate analysis on The Nation Decides 2024.
Do you believe in Jesus?
Peter Lowe, the one-time drug dealer turned pastor, along with 2 others, will be executed at 12 midnight local time.
I thought this would be our final run ever. We had made millions and millions of dollars, but God had other plans.
We'll walk straight out of here, pretend to be the media.
This pathetic maggot got caught trying to escape my prison.
He's a changed person. He's a new man.
I found Christ in here.
I found Christ too.
My name is Peter Lowe, and I will be executed in 2 hours. Why am I being executed, you ask?
Salvation is a gift.
Hi, I'm Tim Che, the director and writer of The Firing Squad. You can participate in our Million Souls campaign, inviting everyone you know to Jesus. Listen, we all face some kind of firing squad in our lives, and yet faith in the Lord, that challenge can lead us to true peace in this insane world. We can't do it without you. We're competing with big Hollywood movies, so we're relying on your voice to spread the word. Thank you again for supporting this important movie.
Are you ready to help your family get prepared for the unexpected?
Everyone in? Here we go!
Ladybug and Cat Noir know how important it is to be ready. Because you never know when Hawkmoth is going to strike, or a disaster will hit. And you don't need miraculous powers. Just put those planning skills you already have to good use. Know who to call, decide on a safe meeting location, and create an emergency preparedness kit. Make a plan that will help you and your family be ready when emergencies happen. Ready Kids can help.
I'm coming to save you!
Get started at ready.gov/kids.
When I was growing up, my mom was extremely tidy. We were trained to put things back where we got them from. One day, when I walked into my mom's house, I felt like I walked to someone else's house. There was stuff everywhere. And just growing up the way I grew up, and to see this transition was very alarming.
When Shen talked to me, it was a wake-up call, and that's when I went to the doctor.
Science. In just minutes, President Biden and former President Trump will face off in the first debate of this election cycle on CNN. Here with me now is NTD's Dave Martin. Dave, what do you have?
Got lots for you, Tiff, all right? I'm interested to see how this debate compares to the first one they had in 2020. So let's take a look back at who voters say won that debate. Now here we are right here. Who won the 2020 presidential debate? Biden, nearly half had Biden winning. Trump behind at 41%, 10% with a tie. Now, interestingly, more than 80% of respondents said the general tone of this debate was negative. You know, there was some personal attacks, interrupting each other, talking over each other. In fact, 69%, that's more than 2/3, said they left this debate feeling annoyed. So it was memorable, but in a more negative way.
And Dave, we do have these elections every 4 years, but how beneficial are voters finding these polls especially?
Well, let's take a look at these numbers. These are from the Pew Research Center. Now, this is what voters thought of the presidential debates from 2000 to 2016. That's 5 straight debates. Every single time, at least more than 60% found them to be helpful, some of them very helpful. That, of course, means less than 40% found them not helpful. Now, of course, the first live televised debate, this is between Nixon and Kennedy back in 1960, is largely considered for turning the race in favor for JFK, who came off so much better in person and on TV. Meanwhile, the most beneficial debate, according to voters, back in 1992, that was the 3-person debate between Clinton, Bush, and Ross Perot. Tonight's debate, of course, will only have 2.
Well, Dave Martin, our data analyst, thank you so much for that. And Steve, back to you at the desk.
And right now we're
this week.
Right now we're going to turn back to our White House correspondent, Iris Tao in D.C. Iris, give us some idea of what each candidate's strategy will be and what we can expect from their campaigns during the debate.
Sure. So both sides are actually doing a lot both before, during, and actually also after the debate. In a new advertising blitz today, both campaigns released new TV ads with Biden's focused on abortion while Trump's focused on the economy and the border. Watch.
They're putting us back decades, if not centuries. Donald Trump did this.
Are you financially better off since he became president?
And Biden's campaign also said that they would use a, quote, rapid response strategy in which they plan to quickly respond to Trump's comments both during and after the debate, citing a need for fact-checking. Meanwhile, Trump has fired back before saying that the other side is actually spreading more falsehoods. And we also expect Trump's team, including his campaign and the RNC's, for example, X account, to also post clips from the debate very quickly as the two clash over on the debate stage. Meanwhile, after the debate, Biden's campaign will also have a number of surrogates talking to media outlets in the spin room, and they include Representative Crockett and also Senator Warnock and California Governor Gavin Newsom. In the first, Biden's campaign will also host a handful of influencers in a bid to target young voters. Meanwhile, the Trump campaign will have a line of Republican VP hopefuls to talk to media outlets in that debate space, and also they include North Dakota Governor Doug Burgum, Senators J.D. Vance, Marco Rubio, and Tim Scott. We know that Trump said before that he has already made up his mind about who to pick for VP, and that person will be present there at the debate. And his campaign said this week that the announcement could come as early as this week. So a lot to watch for tonight as we wait for Trump to see whether he's going to make that big announcement right there tonight. Back to you.
NTD's White House correspondent, Iris Tao, reporting live from the White House. We'll be back to Iris throughout the night. Thank you for that. And let's come back to our in-studio guest, Gerard Filitti, political strategist and senior counsel at the Lawfare Project. Gerard, the candidates have an opportunity to reach undecided voters through these debates. How important is the first debate for the candidates? Let's start with President Biden.
Well, for President Biden, he needs to show that he is energized. He needs to show that he is focused on what independent voters are looking for, the economies, and answering questions, quite frankly, about why inflation is so high, why prices have not adjusted downwards, and why things are more unaffordable today than they ever were. So he really needs to connect with voters on that, and he needs to do so in a way that is convincing to people, that's not citing numbers that make no sense, that people just don't believe. Inflation of 3% doesn't make sense to people when they're seeing that they're paying much more today than they did 4 years ago.
And then what about former President Trump? What does he need to do tonight?
What he needs to do tonight is with President Trump, it's always been about temperament. He needs to show that he is presidential. He doesn't need to play to his base. People who love Donald Trump will come out to vote for him. Donald Trump needs to show that he could bridge the gap to people who may not like his antics, but who appreciate his policies. So he needs to stay focused on policies, not personal attacks, not discussions about the jury or Alvin Bragg or anyone who's prosecuting him. He needs to focus on the issues. And if he does that, he has a very good chance of swaying a lot of independent voters.
And on that note, Gerard, we've seen many debates this election year devolve into shouting matches. Of course, tonight the mics will be muted when a candidate isn't speaking. But zooming out a bit, what do you think Americans deserve to get out of these debates?
Americans deserve to have policy discussions. Debates used to be about specific agendas. It used to be about how you control inflation, how you have a nuclear treaty with a different country, how you reduce the likelihood of war. Today, it's more about attitude. It's more about feelings and substantiating that you have a different vision, which you're not really explaining well, than the other person. So I think Americans want to go back to facts. They want to go back to hard numbers and hard ideas on how to deal with the problems that we face.
So, Gerard, historically, do we have an idea of how first debates have impacted the outcome of presidential elections?
In general, they set the tone, because what you see at the first debate makes you more inclined to see the same thing at the second or the third debate. So it does set the tone. This year, it's unprecedented. We don't know what the second debate will look like, if there even will be a second debate, even though the candidates agreed to it. So this is different. People, I think, will be more eyes on this debate than on the next one. So this is a potentially one shot to get your message out. And this is why it's so important for both candidates.
On that note, this debate comes a lot earlier in the election cycle than it normally would. Normally after the Labor Day weekend is when people start considering the candidates, the policies, all of that. But from what we're seeing in terms of reporting, it seems most of the nation will be watching tonight's debate. How big of a litmus test, if you will, is tonight's debate?
I think it's huge, because we haven't had one-on-one discussions on policy and agenda, not since the last election. You've had sound bites, you've had speeches, you've had campaign rallies, but no real discussions. So people are tuning in to watch that, and they go into the conventions, into the summer, into talking to their friends at the beach during the summer about politics with what they saw tonight. So this is crucial for a lot of people.
There's going to be, sorry.
Oh, just highlighting that there is no live audience for tonight's debate. We've seen a lot of reporting saying that could benefit President Biden, but at the same time, we've seen with former President Trump and his rallies, he really draws and is energized from the crowd. And for his past debates where there was an audience, you also see him kind of feeding off that energy. Could this format actually hurt Trump in that case, and not having a live audience?
Well, that's a very valid argument. I tend to think the opposite, though. I think that he may benefit from not having an audience to distract. He's not playing to a crowd. He's talking to a camera. He's talking to the other person standing beside him. And that may make him more focused on the issues instead of playing the crowds.
And right now we have some images we're going to bring up. Senator Tim Scott on location, posting a photograph of, looks like United States senators and members of Congress attending, that will be potentially attending the debate. You have a few folks there that are on the VP short list from what we've heard. Senator Tim Scott in the center, Senator Marco Rubio, former cabinet member Ben Carson there as well. Gerard, what do you make of the potential VP pick? Trump teased the fact that he will be in the room tonight.
Well, what is the room? The room can be anywhere the TVs are, so we don't know that with certainty. With Donald Trump, he is known to be a maverick in his choices of people, whether it's vice president or members of the cabinet. Mike Pence was not the obvious choice in 2016. So tonight, we may not see any one of these people become the nominee for vice president. We may have an unexpected pick that's not in that photo.
And back to the point that you made earlier about composure, and to Tiff's point as well, the incumbent usually has a tough time with the first debate. You're looking at two chief executives that aren't used to being talked to in any type of tone. So how important is it for both of them, not just former President Trump, but President Biden as well? Will people be watching the demeanor and the composure almost, with a closer eye than, say, the policy?
People still talk about the "come on, man" Biden response from the last election cycle. So people do watch this. People pay attention on how they take criticism, how they take tough questions, what their composure is. Because to be president, you need to be dealing with dictators. You need to be dealing with the worst people in the world, and you need to maintain your composure for that. And Americans want to see how presidents react under pressure.
And coming up after this short break is the CNN presidential debate simulcast right here on NTD News. We'll be back with our coverage right after the debate. And for anyone watching our live stream, you can find a link to the debate in the description below. After the debate, check the description for a link to our post-debate coverage. I'm Steve Lance.
And I'm Tiffany Meier.
And this has been The Nation Decides 2024. We'll see you soon. And welcome back to our post-debate coverage on The Nation Decides. I'm Steve Lance.
And I'm Tiffany Meier.
And back with us here at the desk is Dante Mills, political strategist and national trial attorney at Mills Edwards, and Gerard Filitti, political strategist and senior counsel at the Lawfare Project. There we have it. The first debate is in the books. Did it meet your expectations?
Listen, this debate, it was between will Biden be competent and will Trump be able to control himself? I think that was the overarching theme here. And I think Trump won out. I think there were more moments where Biden did not seem competent, where he had senior moments, than moments where Trump lost his cool. So if you set that as the barometer, right, these are the two things that we're looking for: Biden's competency, Trump's ability to control himself. I think Trump held out a little bit better than Biden did.
And Dante, I want to get your thoughts. The obvious elephant in the room as soon as the debate started. President Biden clearly had a hoarse voice, which doesn't help the argument that he's of age and his health concerns and questions. How do you think voters are going to perceive his voice tonight?
I think not only his voice, but his mannerisms and his facial expression. One thing I teach my students when I'm teaching trial advocacy or how to present yourself, those are things that everybody looks at. They take those cues. And a lot of times it seemed as if President Biden had a blank stare. If he was kind of looking off, you couldn't tell if he was focused or not. And then when you add in his voice, it seemed to make it like he was struggling to speak and struggling to put his words together. And of course, that's going to impact what people are hearing. He may have said something that really made sense, but the way he said it, it makes it difficult for people to digest. And that's going to be held against him.
Gerard?
Well, this format was very good for Donald Trump. The fact that the microphones were cut, the fact that there was no audience, you saw him look statesmanlike. You saw him give answers to some extent to questions and not go off on tangents as he has in other debates. And the split screen did Biden no favors. People be able to look at him having that stare off into space and looking sometimes confused with a weak voice while Donald Trump was speaking. That did not appear good. So this is what we have is I think Dante nailed it. This was a matter of competency on part of Biden and Trump's ability to stay calm and collected. And Trump did that. Biden didn't do it as well. So I think Trump really showed that a different side than people were expecting.
And you think about the prep that went into this. President Biden was held up, right, in Camp David for the last week, making sure that they prepped the right way, where Donald Trump was out on the stump, moving around, and he said, I trained for this my whole life. But he acted different tonight, Donald Trump did. And what he did is he didn't even look at President Biden for most of the debate, because you can tell he was told, do not allow yourself to be engaged. Don't allow yourself to be pissed off. And there were moments where President Biden was trying to push his buttons, but it didn't work. And that made President Biden almost look a little mean, because he was trying to push those buttons. And you could tell President Biden was prepped to push those buttons so he can get a rise out of former President Trump and make Trump look like he's out of control. But when you do that and it doesn't work, now it just looks like you're just trying to pick and be mean and try to push buttons.
And Dante, I want to expand on what Gerard touched on with the format of tonight's debate, where the mics were muted when the candidate wasn't speaking. What did you make of that? Did that help the debate in terms of what the audience and the viewers at home got out of it?
It did, generally. So a lot of times in this debate, the audience, and the polling shows the audience wants to hear the political responses. They want to hear what you plan to do, what your platform is. So I think that this format really allowed the platforms to come out, because there was not a lot of interruptions. You simply had to say your responses to those answers, and that's all the focus was on. But it did hurt, and I think we just talked about it, it's right, when you have that split screen, which means you have to stay focused the entire time that the other person is responding. And I think a lot of people looked at that. So when someone was giving their answers, you were focusing on their answers, but you were also looking at the reaction of the person that wasn't speaking. And I think that spoke just as loud sometimes as the answers themselves.
Looking online right now, it seems a lot of consensus polls from just people online are saying is that with President Biden, many people couldn't understand what he was saying, but with former President Trump, it seemed that he wasn't really answering any of the questions. He was often commenting on what President Biden was saying. What did you make of that, and what people and viewers, especially voters, would make of that?
I think undecided and independent voters are a little perplexed that they didn't get the answers they were looking for. Both of them were talking more about what they have done or what, trading barbs about what they were instead of focusing on their future plans and what they would actually do. We didn't really hear plans. It can boil it down to every answer was answered by Biden saying he would increase taxes and Trump saying he would cut taxes and regulations. We didn't have more answers than that. We didn't have policy discussions. And I think that left a lot of undecided voters very unsatisfied. But that also leaves them looking at the mannerisms, at the personalities. And there, in this particular debate, Trump came across as better.
And this debate was unlike any other debate because we had two presidents who sat for 4 years, right? So we had two people that the public knows. They know generally who these people are because they served terms as presidents. And they know that former President Trump is going to go hard on economics. They know that President Biden is going to be compassionate and show that he cares about the people, but not really flush out how to get the best results for the people. I don't think that changed tonight. I think that these people, the way they came in, the way they were during their presidency, it showed it's going to remain. So I think really just allowed the people to focus on if Donald Trump can be controlled and if President Joe Biden still has the competency there to carry another 4 years the way he carried the original 4 years that he served.
And right now we're taking a look here at the screen at the spin room. That's the the area with all the media gathering and all of the surrogates on both sides. Right here you can see Congresswoman Elise Stefanik. She's on the short list potentially to be a VP pick for former President Trump. They're in there and just, we watched the debate live and we're able to soak it all in. Now this is the time where people maybe fill in the blanks and change people's opinions as to what they maybe saw or didn't see. And so with that said, Dante, do you think that any of the candidates potentially left anything on the table?
I don't. I think they took their shots. I don't think everything landed, but I do believe they took their shots. You heard President Biden bring up the felony convictions. I was waiting to see how long it would take him to get into that because that's clearly something that could impact people. And he tried it. And I think former President Trump had a response where he knew he was going to deflect and turn the felony convictions not only onto Hunter Biden, but also say, well, you are the one who had me convicted because I'm your political rival. So I think both sides took their shots. I don't think anything happened that truly was unexpected. And I think both sides showed they were prepared. I just think one strategy, former President Trump's strategy, worked better than President Biden's strategy because President Biden was not able to get former President Trump to lose his cool.
Gerard, should Trump have taken a, claim that he had a 6 handicap in his golf game?
You know what? You need humor in every debate. You don't want to be concerned about the health of the candidates. You want to have humor in this. But kidding aside, the issue here is that at times both candidates seemed that they were engaging in a porch conversation at a nursing home. They were trading barbs. You'd expect that from people who have nothing better to do in life than to examine each other's weaknesses. And that was disappointing, I think, to a lot of viewers. That's not the types of attacks. They were not as vicious as you'd seen on the campaign trail. They were muted, but you had campaign talking points and you had barbs. And voters were turned off by that.
And right now we can see here Vivek Ramaswamy is in the spin room right now speaking on behalf of his candidate, former President Trump, which reminds us that the former president did tease the fact that that VP pick is going to be attending the debate, which raises questions. Could it possibly be Vivek or Elise Stefanik? We know that Tim Scott is there as well, Senator Tim Scott, who the president, that was the only potential VP pick that the president, if I recall correctly, mentioned in the debate was Tim Scott and how they worked on those opportunity zones.
Well, I think that's very interesting, and Tim Scott has been one of the people who's been consistently by Trump's side ever since the, he won the nomination effectively and the campaigning ended. It is interesting, though, if Trump is looking at Tim Scott, he's also looking at the black vote, which is what he has been pushing hard for, even during the trial in Manhattan. He's going to Harlem, he's courting minority voters, and he's made progress with them. But Trump also needs to consider the issue of abortion, and he needs to have a strong female voice on his team, because that's the issue where Republicans have been weakest since Dobbs came out 2 years ago, and Tim Scott may not add to that to Trump's team.
Yeah, and that's one thing that you look at when you look for a vice presidential candidate, somebody that's going to complement you and fill in a gap that you may have in your presidency, your candidacy. Tim Scott, there are some strengths that he has where there's weak spots in former President Trump's candidacy. We also look at Mark Rubio and others who can add to bringing a broader base. Now, you did mention the abortion. I believe that was the highlight to me of this debate in regards to former President Trump's responses, because he kept saying, follow your heart. And he did put the Supreme Court justices in place that overturned Roe versus Wade. You can't deny that. But what he kept saying is, I wanted this to go to the states so that everybody can follow their heart and do what they believe was right. We don't want the federal government controlling it. I think that was a highlight from it. It was a weak point coming into this debate, but I think if anything, that's one issue that he may have turned around a little bit and gave people an option to see it a different way.
On that note, actually, Trump was asked about, would Trump block access to abortion medication? Biden was asked, does Biden support any legal limits on how late a woman should be able to terminate a pregnancy? Let's listen to those clips again and refresh our memory.
This is something that everybody wanted. Now, 10 years ago or so, they started talking about how many weeks and how many this, getting into other things. But every legal scholar throughout the world, the most respected, wanted it brought back to the states. I did that. Some people don't believe in that, but I believe in the exceptions for rape, incest, and the life of the mother. What happened is we brought it back to the states, and the country is now coming together on this issue. It's been a great thing.
Thank you. President Biden?
It's been a terrible thing. The idea that the politicians, that the founders wanted the politicians to be the ones making decisions about women's health is ridiculous. That's the last. No politician should be making that decision. A doctor should be making those decisions. That's how it should be run. That's what you're going to do. And if I'm elected, I'm going to restore Roe v. Wade.
And with that refresher, Gerard, what did you make of those two sound bites at least, but also what we heard from them tonight?
It's consistent with what we've seen on the campaign trail and what they've said. They're not really discussing the issue. This is still sound bites. And leaving it to the states is code for saying that, I don't really want to touch this. I'm just using the safe answer, which is leave it to the states. That's when a Republican is in doubt, leave it to the states. And Biden didn't offer any real solution either. He's not pushing for a national law. He didn't bring that up. He didn't offer one. He didn't suggest that he would get legislation passed. So it's almost like this issue will keep coming up. Now it's going to come up through the surrogates. It's not them that are debating it on the stage, but everyone else is in the spin room, and they'll be talking about it for weeks to come, is what exactly their positions are or should be, because it's not a simple issue.
And when you hear President Biden say, if I'm reelected, I'm going to reinstate Roe versus Wade, that's not even something he can do, right? There will be some Supreme Court justices, maybe up to 3, that retire during the next 4 years. And that means he may be able to appoint up to 3 Supreme Court justices, and that will have or could have some impact. But it's not something he can do directly from the presidential desk. So you would like to hear some ideas about what could be done to make sure that there are protections in place so that people aren't stripped completely of those rights. Because I don't think anybody wants a situation where people are getting locked up and doctors are afraid to treat, but there has to be some kind of parameters. And I don't think we heard from either candidate what those parameters would be tonight.
And Gerard, to Dante's previous point about former President Trump mentioning a lot that you have to follow your heart, it does also, when he says that, it comes with a disclaimer, which is you also have to get elected. What does he mean?
Well, what Trump means, I think, is that you need to have that strategy. You need to have the people come out and support you for something. And now he's playing a card that has been played before. Whether it was George H.W. Bush or George W. Bush, they both had a compassionate approach to things. And it served them well. It increased their electability. And in conjunction with what we saw the performance tonight, seeing that he was not aggressive, seeing that he was more kind and gentle, that goes to elect me because I can be different. I'm not the person you thought I was.
And that's not what we generally see from former President Trump. And I think, again, continuing to say follow your heart. At one point, he said, I'm the most compassionate person up here, or I have the biggest heart here on this stage. You can clearly tell that they prepped to make him seem more personable, because he does come across as rigid sometimes and forceful. And you can tell that they prepped to make him seem more purposeful. And for someone who says he did not prep, when we know that President Biden was prepping and kind of in a bunker for the last week, it seems like former President Trump's prep worked better.
Fascinating conversation. We are going to pause right there for 1 second and go to our White House correspondent, Iris Tao, who is live from the Capitol. Iris, what have you heard from the Trump and Biden campaigns so far?
Sure. So the President Biden's campaign has been sending out emails throughout the whole debate, basically repeating the same lines of attacks that President Biden has been making during the debate. For example, saying that Trump killed the toughest and fairest bipartisan border deal in decades, a point that Biden made, and also saying that Trump promises a campaign of revenge and retribution, another strong point that Biden has been trying to make during the debate. Meanwhile, he also alleges that Trump will not pledge to accept the 2024 election results, warns of violence if he loses, and that's the headline of the Biden campaign email. We just heard President Biden saying in the debate that he doubts that Trump would accept the results, even though Trump said that he would absolutely do so if the election was fair. Meanwhile, in addition to these emails, something very interesting that we are hearing from media outlets is that their reporters are getting sources from the Biden campaign telling them that President Biden has had a cold for a few days, and that perhaps explains some of the gaffes that the president was making tonight, and that's the sources that they're citing from these media outlets. Meanwhile, the Trump campaign is also pouring in with reactions. We have heard the Trump campaign itself saying that, quote, tonight President Trump delivered the greatest debate performance and victory in history to the largest voter audience in history. And it's also saying that despite weeks of prepping, President Biden, quote, failed and was unable to defend his record on the economy and the border. Meanwhile, his VP hopeful Trump's VP candidates potentially are also reacting to tonight's debate. We have seen Senator Tim Scott saying that Trump dominated and predicting that there, quote, cannot be possibly a second debate. Vivek Ramaswamy even predicts that Biden will not accept the Democratic nomination. And Doug Burgum is saying that Trump is dominating, and also all of them expressing doubts about where things will go next. So tonight we have seen this debate with, of course, both sides pouring in with reactions. Actually, a coalition of Democratic governors are also reacting, with them defending President Biden, saying that tonight voters across America saw President Biden's positive vision for our country, and they saw the real Donald Trump, a liar and a convicted felon. So very, of course, polar reactions from the two sides, and now it's up to the voters to decide who's the winner of tonight's debate. Back to you.
Iris, thank you for that. And we'll be back with our post-debate coverage in just a few minutes on The Nation Decides. Stay with us.
Life doesn't always give you time to change the outcome. Prediabetes does. One in 3 adults has prediabetes, and you could be one of them. There are usually no signs for prediabetes, so it's important to understand your risk. With early diagnosis, prediabetes can be reversed, and you can change the outcome. Take the 1-minute prediabetes risk test today. Go to doihaveprediabetes.org.
بیست و سه سال 16 سال عمري ما هفت
اما داعش کردی ام برانبر خشک و دایکانی ازدی اما کاری که دور لهمو چمک دموکراسی و موافقانی مرو و انسانیت او بارو خی که است های به تایبت ایران خوشبوریا بشه که دگرت و با حالانه که اداره اوباما کرد
ریم بو او هفت روز بو و داعش ذکر
تامبوم كرا قوتينيز قريا بما متشكر بهار فيدان نبو باوان رحم نبو
قدامنا سؤالان من خادران نزل باوان ورستم بس وانا قوبس ناش بجوش باش.
They would literally be auctioned in front of soldiers, and then the soldiers begin to bid.
زارود وان همو جيبرن تي حملي زارود الدم واسسي وان همو جيبرن
وحشیگریه که توا عیاره ظلمی که یک جار گور گوره لما افرطانه کرا و تعدایی که زور زوریان لیده که همانه روزانه دست فروشی ده
imagine being a child, having a child mentality, and these evil people come and wheel you away from the only safety you've ever known.
And we're now back with more of our special coverage on The Nation Decides. I'm Steve Lance.
And I'm Tiffany Meier.
And turning now to our panel, Dante Mills, political strategist and national trial attorney at Mills Edwards, and Gerard Felitti, political strategist and senior counsel at the Lawfare Project. Guys, I want to play a soundbite about immigration. Biden was asked, why should voters trust him to solve the immigration crisis? Trump was asked if he intended to deport every undocumented immigrant in the United States, and if so, how? Let's play it.
We worked very hard to get a bipartisan agreement that not only changed all of that, it made sure that we are in a situation where you had no circumstance where they could come across the border with the number of border police there are now. We significantly increased the number of asylum officers. Significantly, by the way, the Border Patrol endorsed my position. When he was president, he was separating babies from their mothers, putting them in cages, making sure the families were separated. That's not the right way to go.
Look, we had the safest border in the history of our country. The border, all he had to do was leave it. All he had to do was leave it. He decided to open up our border. Now we have the worst border in history. There's never been anything like it.
So, Gerard, obviously former President Trump, this was unprecedented, really, because both of them have a track record. It's no longer one candidate saying what they would do. Former President Trump was president, so he has a track record on the border. He seemed to default to the border throughout the night, a topic that he really likes and stands behind. Who do you think won the argument here?
Well, I think when Biden starts mentioning that he has an endorsement of Border Patrol and the Border Patrol union fact checks him and issues a statement that they never endorsed him, and then Biden refers to kids in cages, which has been debunked many, many times, I think Trump came across as he had the consistent campaign messaging that we don't have safety and security in our country because the borders are porous, not really a plan on how to fix them, but just relying on his record that he did. Biden didn't offer anything. He's not saying how he's going to fix things. He says that he did, that he reduced the crossings by, 40%? Where? The statistic's not there.
I think this just shows where both sides lie. I don't know if the border is an issue that's going to be changed at all. If you believe that people should be here, and we hear President Biden talking about increasing asylum and things like that, he's all bent on protecting people that need a safe place to go. Donald Trump, former President Trump, is bent on protecting America, right, is what he's saying, and keeping people out. Where President Biden is want to allow people in and make them safe. So depending on what side you're on, I don't know if that's going to change in these arguments. I think immigration is something that may be an issue that people are decided on, and it's not going to change. I think it's good for those things to come out and each side to say where they stand. But I don't know if anybody's going to be swayed who believes our role as the #1 nation in the world should be to allow people in who can't survive in other places. That's not going to change by you saying, oh, we need stricter rules at the border. If you have that kind of compassion, you're going to go with it, right? If you think we want to protect America, you're going to go with that. So I don't think immigration is an issue that's really going to be able to flip-flop back and forth depending on what a candidate says at a particular time.
Where I disagree a little bit with that is that we've seen the border crisis go beyond the borders. We're seeing it in small towns across the USA, even in northern states. So people are seeing the consequences in their towns. They're seeing an increase in taxes to pay for teachers, to pay for health care. It is an issue that people care about. They may not make up, the people who've already decided may not be swayed, but I think that for some undecided voters who may not have that moral clarity on border issue and immigration, they may be swayed by the numbers and the facts.
Yeah, and I agree. There is impact, for sure. If when you allow people in, there's a finite amount of resources that we have in this country. And whenever you give those resources to someone else, there's someone who can't get the resources. And you heard former President Trump continue to talk about veterans, who there is a high homeless rate among veterans, but they have hotels and things that are designated for immigrants. And that's an issue that Former President Trump had the right to point out and should have. But again, if you're on the side of we are the strongest nation in the world and we should be protectors of others, then you're going to be okay with that to a certain extent because you want to be open and you want people to come here to be safe. That's how a lot of our history started, right? Coming to this country because in our countries that a lot of Americans came from, there were struggles. And America welcomed them with open arms. So we have to really find that line. And I don't know if anybody's going to be swayed one way or the other on that type of an issue.
To Dante's point, Gerard, do you think that ultimately when it really comes down to the crux of who's going to sway the election, is it going to come down more toward the issue of abortion versus the economy as opposed to abortion versus the border?
Different people look at different things. The economy will be probably the biggest concern for everyone. That's what we all feel. We all feel the inflation that's taken place in the last 4 years. We all feel that we're not doing as well economically as we can be or should be doing at this point after the pandemic. That's the number one issue. Whether it's abortion is a very driving issue, but it's not just a driving issue for Democrats and independents, for Republicans too, because there is no consensus within the Republican Party right now on whether there should be abortion bans or not. There's debate there as well. So that is an issue that will drive people. Border, less so, but that comes into domestic affairs, it comes into crime, it comes into what we didn't hear in this debate, which was the explosion of anti-Semitism and violence on the streets we've seen all over the country in the last 8 months that the Biden administration has done nothing to address.
Yeah, and I think one thing that the economy is going to be the overlying issue. I think a lot of the polls suggest that and point that out, that people care about the economy if they can afford groceries, if they can put food on their table and take care of their families. And when you look at a sitting president who says, this is what I'm going to do, it's kind of hard to get behind that because you're thinking, well, why haven't you done that in the last 4 years? And I think former President Trump did a good job of saying directly, well, I had an excuse, I had COVID happen under my presidency. We were on such a great path, then COVID hit, and that's why we got derailed a bit. I don't know if President Biden has that kind of a staple to point to and say, here's why we haven't made the progress that I promised. Even though if you give me another 4 years, I really promise that I'm going to get it done now.
Switching gears, let's go to foreign affairs. Ukraine came up tonight. Trump was asked this question and President Biden was given a minute to respond. Are Putin's terms for ending Russia's war against Ukraine acceptable to Trump? Let's watch that clip and refresh our memory.
I will have that war settled between Putin and Zelensky as president-elect before I take office on January 20th. I'll have that war settled. People being killed so needlessly, so stupidly, and I will get it settled, and I'll get it settled fast before I take office.
The fact is that Putin is a war criminal. He's killed thousands and thousands of people, and he has made one thing clear. He wants to reestablish what was part of the Soviet Empire, not just a piece. He wants all of Ukraine. That's what he wants. And then you think he'll stop there?
Gerard, what did you make of this clip when it comes to Ukraine? Hamas and the Israel war also came up, but China did not come up. What did you make of all of that?
Well, with Ukraine, it was the same campaign talking point by Donald Trump, which is bombast but no details. And that's disappointing not to see a more coherent answer in the debate. For Joe Biden, I think he understands the bigger picture. He sees the issue in the world with democracy at stake all over and the advances made with the fall of the Soviet Union being at risk. Neither candidate really addressed the issues with China, which is probably one of the biggest issues that we will be dealing with for the next several decades. So this was something that I think CNN had kind of a miss on. They should have asked that. They should have asked about the trade imbalance. They should have asked about opportunities even during COVID to replace our reliance on China and what these candidates would do in the future about that. But there was even the opioid crisis. There was no mention by either candidate of things that they could be doing with China to stem this crisis. So it was disappointing that the focus was Ukraine, not so much Hamas in the Middle East, because those answers are also canned answers that didn't really produce any meaningful information about what these people would do. Biden's talking about the plan that he offered that Hamas rejected. Okay, so how does that bring peace in the Middle East? Trump, I mean, at least he has the Abraham Accords to fall back on, but neither candidate really said how they would accomplish anything.
I think it really just showed, again, it keeps pointing back to the theme of these two candidates. President Biden is a compassionate person. When he talked about Ukraine, he talked about Putin being a bad person and kind of making sure that he doesn't input his will onto the rest of the world, where Trump really attacked that from an economic standpoint. He talked about the tariffs, he talked about trade, he talked about making it economically just non-feasible for a war to continue to happen, and saying what we need to do is make sure that we partner with both of them so that they see a bigger picture of economic success for their countries and stop the war with each other. Where President Biden talked about making sure that you eradicate somebody in Putin who is set out to take over not only Ukraine, but other parts of the former USSR and put that aggression onto everybody else. And that's what President Joe Biden wanted to make sure he stopped. So I think when we talked about those issues, they didn't offer specific details, but what they did is they show how they attack the problems. And if you're a voter, if you're an independent voter, if you're haven't decided yet, you may be deciding on, do I want somebody who I think cares about people, or do I want somebody who's obsessed with the bottom line and making sure that we're successful? Because that's where these two candidates seem to really set their differences at.
And Dante, to Gerard's point, China did not really come up at all. Trump briefly went after President Biden, calling him a Manchurian candidate. President Biden, when he was answering about the opioid epidemic, mentioned these machines and briefly the precursors that are coming from China when it comes to the fentanyl crisis. But what did you make of China not being such a big topic in tonight's debate, given the headlines we are seeing with the tensions in the South China Sea and the Indo-Pacific? What did you make of that?
It was disappointing. We obviously know, I mean, if we're going to talk about Russia and Ukraine, why not talk about Taiwan and China, right? Why not? And you see these issues continue to come up where there are instances where maybe there's some connections to the Biden family and some money from China, and you think, is that why President Biden doesn't want to talk about it? Why doesn't former President Trump want to bring that up? I mean, these are issues that are prevalent. China is becoming the largest economy in the world. They're on their way to really knocking us out of that #1 spot. They're set out to do that. So we should have a plan to make sure that we are forcing trade on them, that we're making sure that they take our goods just like we are taking their goods in. We want import and export to start to become balanced. Those are things you want to hear from your candidates to make sure that we can export and we can put our product out, because that generates revenue in our country and boosts our economy. So those are things that I look forward to hearing, but unfortunately, they didn't come up at all.
Expanding on that, Gerard, what do you make of what Dante just said? But also when it comes to this election, how big of a deal will foreign policy be when voters decide who they want to vote for? How do you see China fitting into that?
Well, I think it's a little bit too early in the election season to see how big of a role foreign policy will play, because right now we're dealing more with domestic issues. That's been the exceeding focus. And when we have seen foreign issues, it's been Russia, Ukraine, it's been Iran, Israel, and terrorism. It has not been China. It has not been South America. It has not been Africa. It seems to be following a trend by the Biden administration not to have a fully coherent foreign policy in those parts of the world. That's a source of criticism. That's a source that Donald Trump could attack on. That's a source that Donald Trump also could provide answers on. I think the issue is that foreign policy will play more of a role as we get closer to the election, but that's only because we will see more foreign headlines coming into our homes, not because of what's going on now.
Yeah, and it's why I think as we get close to the election, the polls will adjust based on current events. If there is something that's really happening around the world, it may sway people in the moment. However, when people go back home and go to sleep at night, they're going to remember their own problems. So I think our economy is going to be the #1 issue, but worldwide politics may have a short spark or an impact, that's short-lived based on the current events of the day.
And on that note, let's now catch up with NTD's Iris Tao, who is at the White House. Iris, anything new from the campaigns?
So actually, we've just heard from President Biden himself after this debate. He stopped by an after party in Atlanta to a crowd cheering him on, saying 4 more years. And he said that basically that Trump's performance was not good, saying that I can't think of one thing he said that was true. We're going to beat this guy. I need you in order to beat him. Notably, though, Biden focused more on Trump's performance, not of his own. And then First Lady Jill Biden also was a bit basically praising Biden's performance tonight, saying that such a great job, you answered every question. So that's the latest reactions we got from Biden and the First Lady right after the debate. Meanwhile, Biden's campaign itself also sent out an after-debate statement saying that tonight President Biden presented a positive and winning vision for the future of America, while Trump's performance tonight reminded the American people why they fired him 4 years ago. So we're still hearing the Democratic world and mostly cheering Biden's performance on tonight. And of course, we know that actually after this debate, we're going to see more from the two candidates just tomorrow, in a few hours actually. And Biden will be in North Carolina holding a post-debate rally, and Trump will be in Virginia also rallying and talking about President Biden's presidency, a right to the voters right after this debate. Back to you.
Iris, thank you for those updates, and we will return now to our panel here in studio in New York. Here with us, we have Dante Mills, political strategist and national trial attorney at Mills Edwards, and Gerard Fidelity, political strategist and senior counsel at the Lawfare Project. Great to have you both with us still. Now, given tonight's debate, how do you see this moving the needle, or will it move the needle in the polls?
Well, I think it will move the needle because there's a big group of people who are still undecided. And I think the polls are so close with people who are going to support former President Trump no matter what, and people who are going to support President Biden no matter what, that you're looking at that middle group to see if you can steal away a few votes, because that may make the difference. And I think the performance today by President Biden is going to turn some people off. There's going to be some people who say, I don't trust that, even though I believe he's a wonderful person, he means well, I don't know if he can do what he needs to do for the next 4 years. Because he has some cognitive issues. He's older. And I think that's what's going to come out of this debate.
What does that mean for the Democratic Party?
I think they really have to pivot. It's too late to pivot with a candidate, right? They just haven't put anybody else up that they can say now, oh, they're now prepared to lead the country starting in 6 months. They just haven't propped anybody up to do that. But you have to pivot the message. And I think your message has to be really the danger that would happen if former President Trump becomes president. And I think one of the biggest points that President Biden made today that really stuck out to me is when he said to former President Trump, of the 44 top people, your top aides, 40 are not supporting you. I think that's what they have to focus on. The fact that the people closest to former President Trump are concerned about him, and they're not backing him and out, on his stump and not supporting him, and say it's a danger to allow him to be president. You can't now just rely on how good President Biden is going to be. You have to almost pivot to how bad or how dangerous it is for former President Trump to be president again, because I think President Biden just doesn't have a lot to offer now as far as hope for a steady hand in the future.
Well, I think that right now, by tomorrow, we will see a bump in the polls to Donald Trump. I think the polls that are being taken right now will show that people think he did very well, and that will play in his favor. After that, that bump will go away, because after the post-debate commentary and spin, people will start questioning what they heard, and the spin will start to take over. Ultimately, if Donald Trump wants to maintain any advantage and not be painted as what Biden is smart to paint him as, it's basically someone who you do not want as president, you want Biden instead. The issue is Kamala Harris. Trump needs to start campaigning that this is not a debate, or this is not an election between Joe Biden and Donald Trump. It's a campaign and an election between Kamala Harris and Donald Trump. Because what we saw from tonight, a lot of people have that question. A lot of people in the Democratic Party have that question. And the other polls you're going to see tomorrow are who should be on the top of the ticket if Biden bows out.
The problem is, I don't know, but the polls don't show Kamala Harris as being a strong candidate on her own. So if you're saying, if President Biden is saying, well, you're not really voting for me, you're voting for Vice President Kamala Harris, I don't know if she wins that vote, because she just doesn't have the support. Not only that Joe Biden has, but just the support amongst the party, because she has not been out there showing America who she is, to really separate herself and say, you can believe in me, you can trust in me.
But that's the thing, that's why it should be the Trump campaign that's pushing that narrative, because you're really voting for either Kamala Harris presidency or Donald Trump presidency. After what we saw tonight with Joe Biden, people have concerns. So if Trump pushes this as, I'm not really campaigning against Joe Biden, I'm campaigning against someone who is untested and unliked. This is why you should vote for me. It's not about me and Joe Biden, it's about me and her. he might have an advantage.
So now that we're talking about Kamala Harris as a potential candidate, does this debate, if it has a seismic effect, which it appears like it may have on the whole election, does it change Trump's potential VP pick?
I think that Trump actually has made up his mind. I don't think it impacts that, but I think that we will see more of an important emphasis placed on the vice presidential debates. I think that will be significant as well, because we need to see how those candidates stack up as well.
Yeah, I agree with Gerard. If the argument goes that way, where Donald Trump is successful in saying this election is between myself and Kamala Harris, I think the Democratic Party is in a lot of trouble. I don't think the vice presidential candidates really have much impact during the election, but if it's leaning that way, then I do believe that it would be a successful argument for the Republicans. But what we have to now look at, though, is what does former President Trump do coming out of this win? And I think what he could do best is absolutely, if I was a betting man, I would bet everybody here that there is no second debate. You can't give President Biden a chance to make up for this. And you also don't want to put yourself in a position where now the people that you may have won over, you piss them back off. So if I was former President Trump and his team, I would be telling him to stay quiet, stay low, and kind of just ride this into the election, right? It started earlier enough that you can get people behind you, just ride the wave. Don't get out there screaming and bombastic and now going back to or reverting back to the person that they thought you were before. Just stay this presidential candidate. And allow this Donald Trump that we saw tonight to carry forward throughout the rest of the election cycle.
To Dante's previous point, advice to the Biden campaign is to not so much defend yourself anymore, because it feels that might not be the best strategy, but to attack former President Trump. One of those issues may be the issue of January 6th and democracy, which came up tonight. The candidates were asked about January 6th. Here's what they said.
I said peacefully and patriotically. And Nancy Pelosi, if you just watched the news from 2 days ago, on tape to her daughter, who's a documentary filmmaker, they say, but she's saying, oh, no, it's my responsibility. I was responsible for this, because I offered her 10,000 soldiers or National Guard, and she turned them down. And the mayor of D.C., they turned it down. And I said, you know what? There's a lot of people coming. You could feel it. You could feel it, too, and you could feel it.
He says he wants to commute their sentences, and these people should be in jail, and they should be the ones who are being held accountable. And he wants to let them all out.
Gerard, 4 years later, we're still talking about January 6th. Is this going to play a major part in this year's election?
Less and less so. These attacks have not stuck. We see Donald Trump survive. We see Donald Trump even survive on convictions. We see that the January 6th issue is not going away, but it's not damaging Trump more than it already has. And these attacks tonight by Biden, I don't think that they were effective. Trump skated on the issue tonight, which is why, to Dante's point, he shouldn't be debating again. But the other thing that stuck out is, if you're saying that the people who were participating in January 6th should be in jail, well, what about the people who are participating in all the riots we're seeing in America today, what the Biden administration has been weak on? It raises questions about why we are focusing on January 6th. Yes, it's a crucial issue, but they're not prosecuting it. And I don't mean in a courtroom. They're not arguing in a way that is winning hearts and minds more than it already has.
Yeah, but they are prosecuting it in the courtroom. I mean, I don't think we can look at January 6th and say that nobody did anything wrong there. I don't think that's the stance that we should have. And I don't know if that individual issue really impacts former President Trump. But when you add that together with his own legal issues and the legal issues of the people that are surrounding him, a narrative can be created. If you're looking to create one, that there is some danger there, that he doesn't follow the rule of law, that there should be some concern. Now, I think that former President Trump made a strong point that he had to make. He said, oh, when I said I'm going to get retribution against everybody if I get elected again, I meant my retribution will be success, right? He had to make some kind of excuse up for making threats and saying, you did this to me, I'm going to do something to you, because that is scary, right? You don't want someone in the highest office in the land to come in with an axe to grind or a grudge where you think he's going to actually act on it. So for him to kind of turn that around and say, well, I meant my retribution is going to be, I'm going to be so successful that you see you shouldn't have done this. I think he needed to say that. I think that should be the message now that he's moving forward with. But President Joe Biden should be hammering on all of these legal issues that are surrounding former President Trump and creating a chaotic situation.
In fairness, the former president had the famous line from his debate with Hillary Clinton that he would put her in jail. He never did. So what do you make of his comment here?
I think that we've come to be accustomed to Donald Trump making bombastic statements over the years. That doesn't make them any less dangerous to some people. That doesn't make them any less bad to be made at all. But I think most Americans are taking a lot of what he says as bombast and not as actual threats.
Now, one issue that does seem to be impacting all Americans is the fentanyl crisis, or the opioid crisis, that did come up in tonight's debate. The candidates were asked what they would do to help Americans who are addicted to opioids and struggling to get the treatment they need. Let's watch those clips again.
The numbers of the amount of drugs and human trafficking in women coming across our border, the worst thing I've ever seen. At numbers that nobody's ever seen under him because the border's so bad. But the number of drugs coming across our border now is the largest we've ever had by far.
Fentanyl and the byproducts of fentanyl went down for a while. And I wanted to make sure we use the machinery that can detect fentanyl, these big machines that roll over everything that comes across the border. And it costs a lot of money. That was part of this deal we put together, this bipartisan deal. And when we had that deal done, he called his Republican colleagues, said, don't do it. No, he never argued it's not a good bill. It's a really good bill. We need those machines.
With this whole segment, it did seem both candidates were kind of just, addressing what the other candidate had said. Neither was really answering the question. What do you think Americans are looking for when it comes to this issue that has impacted so many?
I think Americans are disappointed based on the answers and responses given tonight, because there were no answers. There was no talk about, the only thing that was mentioned was a machine that can detect fentanyl. But that doesn't address the issue of why the addictions are there in the first place, or what you can do to help those people. Because if you take fentanyl away, right, then it goes to a different drug. It's replaced if you don't address the issues that are impacting these people and got them addicted in the first place. And nobody addressed that at all. I think it was an opportunity because both former President Trump and President Joe Biden had close people in their family that were impacted by addiction. So for them to come up to this debate with no solid answers or even no approach is disappointing. All that former President Trump said was, oh, the numbers are bigger now than ever. But he didn't say anything about what he would do to get those numbers down. He just pointed the finger. So I think that there's some disappointment here by the families who were watching this that are impacted by the addiction crisis that really is existing in America.
Gerard, what did you make of the answers or the lack of answers here?
Well, the interesting answer is when you have machines that are scanning trucks, that's at the legal crossings. It's not where drugs are also crossing illegally, and not everything is detected. But to Dante's point, this is a multifaceted answer because you need mental health issues. These are mental health issues, first and foremost. And it's not just with the fentanyl crisis, it's also homelessness that plays into mental health. The Democrats are usually strong in that realm. They should be making more of a priority talking about mental health crisis and how to address it in both of these aspects. But you're also talking about foreign policy. What are you doing to work with Mexico to stop the flow over the border? What are you doing with China to stop the foreproduct of coming in? None of that was addressed. And to be honest, I think that this is an important issue for a lot of Americans, but it's not as significant as the economy, which is where you saw most of the exchanges. This played less in terms of formulating policy.
I think it is a part of the economy, and indirectly and directly, because families are impacted by this. And we see that when someone has an addiction, it doesn't just affect them by themselves. It affects the people around them. Right, the people that they would normally support, the people that would support them. It increases homelessness. It increases job. People that's not working and supporting themselves, so they lean heavier on social services. It increases violence because you now have people who are in desperate situations, so they may resort to theft or robbery or things like that. So I think that there really should have been an emphasis on that issue because it impacts so many other issues that are affecting us as Americans as we live. We want to be safe. We want to be protected. We want to make sure that if someone breaks their leg and goes to get a medication, that they don't end up 6 months later living out on the street because now they have an addiction to fentanyl because it went from oxycodone and it progressed. We want to make sure that those issues are addressed. And again, it was just disappointing that we didn't hear any of that.
Very important discussion, and I'm sure we'll be talking a lot more about it in the days to come. Let's go right now to the Data Hub with NTD's Dave Martin. He's got the numbers coming in now. Dave, what do we have?
Yeah, hi, listen, we are going to talk about the upcoming schedules for debates. There's only one upcoming at this point. September 10th is going to be hosted by ABC. Now, to answer your second question about the how many candidates will be in that one, it'll likely be just two. That's Trump and Biden. Very unlikely we'll have three. That's because ABC's threshold is going to be very similar to CNN, 15%. As we saw earlier, Kennedy only had 7.5%. He's the closest independent, but he would have to double that in the next 2 months just to become eligible. Now, there is a vice president debate scheduled tentatively for this July, but the who, when, and where has not been figured out yet. Now, also, the Commission on Presidential Debates has also scheduled 3 debates this fall for the president, as well as one for the vice president. Those, though, have been canceled. They said Biden's campaign would not agree with them. So all in all, we've got one more scheduled presidential debate. That'll be on September 10 on ABC. Back to you guys at the desk.
Dave Martin at the Data Hub. Thank you, Dave.
And back to our panel, Dante Mills, political strategist and national trial attorney at Mills & Edwards, and Gerard Filitti, political strategist and senior counsel at the Lawfare Project. Now, one topic that also came up in tonight's debate was the hosts were asking former President Trump if he'll accept this year's election results. Let's play that and see what happened there.
President Trump, the question was, will you accept the results of the election, regardless of who wins? Yes or no, please.
If it's a fair and legal and good election, absolutely.
What did you make of Trump's answer there, if it's a fair and legal election?
Well, it's obviously a qualified answer, but the answer you'd expect, because this is something he's campaigned strongly on, that there are many people who are voting for Trump because they think the outcome of the election was not fair or free or accurate. And this also mitigates the issues that he's facing now in courtrooms, why he's fighting. So he can't answer more definitively. He has to be guarded in his answer, but I also think that there's nothing wrong with the answer he gave.
Well, before I get into that answer, I will say September 10th is the next scheduled debate. I have dinner reservations that I'm not canceling because we will not be here for that. I really doubt that they're going to move forward with another debate. If you're on former President Trump's team, you cancel that immediately. You come up with any excuse you can to make sure that doesn't happen and you don't give President Biden a chance to redeem himself. But in regards to the answer by former President Trump about will he accept the results of this election? I think it's disheartening because he is a former president and he's running for president to be president of the United States. He at least has to say that he believes in our electoral process. It shouldn't be that hard. So for him to say, oh, if it's a fair and good election, good meaning if you win. So if you don't win, does that mean it was a bad election? So I think to qualify that answer at all, it's disheartening as someone who's saying, I'm going to cast my vote because I think it matters, I think it counts, and I think it will make a difference. And you had the person you're voting for saying, well, it's a good election if I win, and I won't challenge it, but if I don't, who knows what's going to happen? I think that's a bad answer, and that's something that is an Achilles heel for former President Trump's campaign, because you have people who just want to say, yes, let's make sure it's fair and all of that, but let's all agree that we trust in our American system, because otherwise, how do you run for president saying, I don't believe in the system I'm trying to run?
In fairness to the former president's point, though, do you think we do maybe need to take a step back, take a stroll through memory lane and remember how 2020 was a different election from many previous ones because of COVID?
It was a different election. I think 2020 really was I think 2016, if you look at the history of the elections in our country, 2016 really introduced the mail-in ballot and absentee ballots, things like that really kind of took off. 2020, it really hit home with the mail-in ballots and absentee ballots. So I think, if anything, people wanted to make sure that those ballots were confirmed and there were no issues there, but that work has been done. Everybody on every side has poured into whether or not that last election was legitimate, and if there were votes that were cast that should not have been. And I don't think there's any poll, I don't think there's any proof that's come out to say that votes were casted in an illegal manner that would have impacted the outcome of the election. So I would just want the person that I'm voting for to say, I believe in the system that I'm trying to run. You should believe in that system, and let's win this the right way.
Let's just give Jared a quick moment to respond.
I think it is an Achilles heel for Donald Trump, but all the cards have been played. This is not something new. This is something we've known about and heard arguments about daily for 4 years. So I don't think this is something that's going to affect more voters that haven't already made up their minds, because you have to be living under a rock not to be aware of what happened January 6th, what Trump's position is, and what the criticism is. So it may be a few votes on the margin that get swayed, but I don't think it's been played. I don't think it's going to go anywhere. And yeah, it's disheartening. It absolutely is. But there still are, and this is disheartening as well, many Americans who believe that the voting process is flawed. And I think we need to fix that problem before we can get to a place where we have candidates who no longer make issues out of elections.
Now, one big issue that has been coming up before this debate, but also in this debate, was mental acuity. Neither of these candidates are necessarily young. Now, President Biden was asked about how he would address concerns about his capability to serve as president well into his 80s. Former President Trump was also asked that. He'd be 82 at the end of his second term. And what was his response to voters about his ability to serve? Let's play those sound bites and refresh our memory.
I spent half my career being criticized being the youngest person in politics. I was the second youngest person ever elected to the United States Senate, and now I'm the oldest. This guy's 3 years younger and a lot less competent. I think that just look at the record. Look at what I've done. Well, I took 2 tests, cognitive tests. I aced them, both of them, as you know. We made it public. He took none. I'd like to see him take one, just one, a real easy one. Like go through the first 5 questions. He couldn't do it. But I took 2 cognitive tests. I took physical exams every year. And, you know, we knock on wood wherever we may have wood, that I'm in very good health.
Well, there were those sound bites. Dante, let's start with you. What did you make of tonight's debate when it comes to that?
I think there's no way around saying that in this issue, President Biden loses. They're similar in age. It's not something where you say, okay, we have this young guy that's just fresh and has these new things and new ideas and great energy. They're both close in age, but they act and respond differently. I think their demeanors tonight. Former President Trump was very forceful, but he was very direct. He did seem presidential. And President Biden just seemed older. Like the grandfather that you may go for advice and not know if he's going to respond or not, but he may sneak in something that really makes sense, and you say, you know what, maybe he does know what he's talking about. But it's a losing battle for President Biden. And there were times, multiple times tonight, where his answers trailed off at the end, where he would speak for 2 minutes, and in that last 15 seconds, you don't know if he remembered what he was talking about. And that's a problem, because he has to engage with world leaders. He has to engage with the Senate, his cabinet, people that are going to make a difference in the way the world runs. And we have to be sure that he can do that, not only next month or tonight, but for the next 4 years.
Some reports are saying that President Biden has a cold, but that aside, what did you make of what we saw tonight especially?
Well, you can have a cold, but what we've seen tonight is consistent with what we've seen with Joe Biden for a while now, that he does trail off. He does seem to be confused at times. And it's heartbreaking. This is a man who served his country for decades. He was the youngest one in the Senate. He has had such a rich history of service to his country, and now he's still running for office at a point when he should be enjoying retirement, when he should be enjoying his golden years. And unfortunately, tonight's performance did no justice to him. There will still be more questions about his ability to serve out a term, more so than for Donald Trump. So I think this is something that is only going to become more of an issue. We are already seeing questions within the Democratic Party, what happens next. And I'm not sure how Biden competently addresses those questions.
Yeah, I just don't know how you fix that, because the way to fix that is to get back out in front of the public and make it clear that you're capable. But there has to be a fear that if we put President Biden back out in front of the public and he does it again, there may not be any coming back from that. So I don't know how you fix this without running the risk of President Biden going somewhere publicly again and speaking and looking the same way. So if I'm on his team, I don't know how you address that.
One of the ways that they have tried to fix it in the past, to Tiffany's point about the spin coming out that he may have had a cold, you have co-chair of the Biden campaign, a great surrogate for the president, Congressman Clyburn, always mentioning that President Biden had a stutter growing up, and that was one way that they would sort of deflect some of this criticism. Do you think that defense may be running thin?
It's running thin. Congressman Clyburn is a very staunch supporter for President President Biden. And Congressman Clymer was in the trenches with President Biden as he was coming up. So I think when you're used to dealing with somebody and you go through that process together, you kind of remember them for who they were. And we can't take away anything from President Biden's service. He was a tremendous, tremendous politician and servant to this nation. But is his time over now? That's the question that we have to ask, because there's no moving around the fact that he's kind of getting to the point that I don't know if you can trust him to be the one, just to use the term, with the finger on the button, because we don't know how capable he is and how long that's going to last. Again, if we're just talking about him finishing out his presidency, yes, till January, yes. But now we're talking about 4 more years from January, and that has to be a concern.
And on that note, we will be right back. More to cover on this exciting debate night on The Nation Decides 2024. Stick around.
The glory of piano masterpieces from the Baroque, Classical, and Romantic periods. New Tang Dynasty Television invites you to join the 2024 NTD International Piano Competition. Together, we preserve and revitalize the art of authentic classical piano music. October 14th to the 19th at the Kaufman Music Center in New York City. Apply now at piano.ntdtv.com.
We are only 80 years removed from countries that killed 60 to 70 million people intentionally. And we have people being like, oh, it can't happen here. Yeah, it can, and it might.
These people, they're not interested in the facts. They're not interested in anything except crushing people that are in their way.
There needs to be a formal deprogramming of the cult members.
A strong church can stop this.
As we naturally age, many people are getting zero amount of this incredible and unique substance. That's when we start seeing an impact in our joints, skin, nails, and even our digestion.
People ask me, Dr. X, what is the #1 supplement I should be taking? My answer is multi-collagen protein.
People's reactions to me, people were like, what are you doing? What is going on? You look amazing. You have a glow about you.
What makes Ancient Nutrition Multi-Collagen stand out from other brands? 10 types of collagen. It's grass-fed, pasture-raised with vitamin C and probiotics. It's proven to reduce joint discomfort rapidly, continuously, and persistently. It improves the appearance of crow's feet after 4 weeks and improves skin tone after 8 weeks. And it promotes hair thickness, growth, and a reduction in hair breakage.
It has transformed everything from my hair. Like, my hair was starting to kind of just, come out, and I don't have that anymore. My skin feels amazing.
Call the number on your screen and find out how to get a free bottle when you order, plus free shipping and our 30-day money-back guarantee. And as a bonus, we will include Dr. Josh Axe and Jordan Rubin's revolutionary book, Multi-Collagen Makeover, free with your order, plus free shipping and free returns.
I have implicit trust in Dr. Axe because the plan worked. I'm living proof of it.
This is the collagen protein that is backed by clinical studies. It's what my family uses, it's what I use, and I know you're gonna benefit in a big way as well.
Love the results or get your money back. This special TV offer is not available in stores. Call the number on your screen or go online now.
And welcome back to The Nation Decides. I'm Steve Lance.
And I'm Tiffany Meier. And now back to our guests. We have Dante Mills, political strategist and national trial attorney at Mills & Edwards, and Gerard Felitti, political strategist and senior counsel at the Lawfare Project. Now, we were already talking about the upcoming debate in September that's so far still set to take place. Given what we saw tonight, though, what do you see as the strategies from both campaigns? And one that we haven't mentioned, Robert F. Kennedy Jr. He was also streaming his own version of the debate. He said he was going to respond to all the same questions, and I guess he had an audience. But do you see him getting more votes after tonight, or are people, like you mentioned earlier, Dante, still going to vote for President Biden because they see what President or former President Trump represents?
I don't think Kennedy is going to demand enough attention to really impact the outcome of this election. I just don't see it happening. We generally have a third-party candidate who wants to get involved, and they'll do things like stream alongside or answer questions alongside a debate, or raise a fuss about them being included. Oftentimes they do have valid political agendas and things that they can add to the conversation, but the way the rules are set up, they just won't qualify to do that. So I don't think he's going to have any impact. So if you look at the people that's left, former President Trump and President Joe Biden, what would happen in another debate? If you're on former President Trump's team, you're saying, I want it to go exactly how this one did. So again, lightning may not strike twice, so why do you allow that to happen? Why would you put yourself in that situation? If you're on President Biden's team, what you're saying is, we need you to be more forceful. We need you to give shorter answers that don't trail off, where you can be really decisive and state your position quickly and then move on. Even if you have time left, don't start to kind of freestyle after that, because that's when you lose your train of thought. So it will be a lot of work that goes into, I think, tightening up President Biden's response, and also just being more forceful in spurts so that he can come across as having that agenda and that policy, but being capable of really asserting it and bringing it out.
And Gerard, what do you make of that? Can Robert F. Kennedy Jr. get some of those votes, or what do you make of the strategies for these both? For better
or for worse, America's a two-party system, and I think we learned our experience with Ross Perot that if you vote for the third-party candidate, it does have an outcome on the effect. An effect on the outcome, excuse me. And the issue here is Robert Kennedy may get some votes now, may be facing people who are looking at Trump and Biden saying, not my people. But as we get closer to the election, his numbers are going to go down, because people are going to realize that if you vote for him and not one or the other, the one you might not want is going to win. In terms of strategy, I think for Biden, he needs to be out on the campaign trail, because we didn't see the State of the Union style performance where he was strong and forceful and vigorous and energetic. We saw something else. And the only way he can overcome that is to show that tonight really was a fluke. It was a cold. It wasn't something more. But does he have it in him to be on the campaign?
That's dangerous, right? You would agree. That's dangerous to throw him out there, because, again, if he has this same kind of performance and it's on video and it's shown that he has the same mannerisms and attention span, it may be something he can't come back from. And this election, I think, truly is going to come down to who can get people off the couch and out of the house. And people may say, I dislike former President Trump, but I have no reason to go out and vote, because I'm not energetic or excited about President Biden either. And I'm equally as concerned about him for different reasons, but I'm equally as concerned, so I'm just going to stay home. And that's the risk that President Biden is running right now. He's kind of taking the energy out of the room and the people that want to support him. And if he has another fumble like this, they're definitely not going to want to get up and support.
Now, Vice President Kamala Harris was just on CNN. Anderson Cooper asked her that some in the Democratic Party are even saying President Biden should step aside. Here's part of that exchange.
CNN's John King has described a panic inside the Democratic Party right now because of President Biden's performance in tonight's debate. He's been hearing from Democratic lawmakers and others around the country. Some within your own party are wondering if President Biden should even step aside. What do you say to that?
Listen, first of all, what we saw tonight is the president making a very clear contrast with Donald Trump on all of the issues that matter to the American people. Yes, there was a slow start, but it was a strong finish. And what became very clear through the course of the night is that Joe Biden is fighting on behalf of the American people, on substance, on policy, on performance. Joe Biden is extraordinarily strong. And
but I'm sorry,
that
on
cannot
substance
be
and
debated.
policy and performance tonight, I mean, the president's performance tonight clearly was disappointing for his supporters. CNN is reporting Democratic lawmakers watching the debate were worried about the president's performance. One said it was a disaster. Another called it a train wreck. Those are Democrats especially worried that Biden did not punch back on Trump's lies.
There you have next in line, Kamala Harris, Vice President. Even her commentary, a slow start.
You read my mind. Politicians are phenomenal at controlling the narrative, right? Kamala Harris, you had to understand that she came into this knowing she would be interviewed and knowing what her talking points would be, but she had to say that he had a slow start. For her to say anything negative as the vice president about the debate of the president who's running for re-election, that shows how drastic his performance was and how bad it was. Because there's no way that any politician would have stood up there and said anything negative if they could have avoided it. But she knew she would have lost all credibility if she tried to say that this was a phenomenal debate. So she said, oh, he started slow and he made it up. But the fact that she had to acknowledge that it was a bad start even means that this was a really bad debate for President Biden.
And to make matters worse, this was not unexpected. We knew that these questions would be asked. We knew that there was probably going to be an issue or a flub or something that Joe Biden did to raise these questions afterwards, and Kamala Harris was unprepared with an answer. You're right. I mean, she had to answer to some extent honestly because it's her own credibility, but that did Joe Biden no favors. And CNN to be asking these questions and going back for a more detailed answer, that's also rather unusual.
Expanding on that, given what we just heard from Vice President Kamala Harris, for Trump's vice president, who would pose the biggest challenge for a debate between the vice presidents?
There are some seasoned politicians that former President Trump are looking at for the vice candidate position. You would have to believe probably Marco Rubio is in the best position because he did presidential debates. And he was in that position where he stood strong. He actually had a heated debate with former President Donald Trump, but he showed that he can stand up. And you have to imagine in the vice presidential debate, Vice President Kamala Harris has to come out guns blazing to make up for what President Biden did in the debate tonight. So you have to imagine Vice President Kamala Harris is going to come in hot, energetic, with a lot of passion and energy, and that whoever is on former President Trump's team has to match that. So he is going to want somebody with a lot of energy, because I think that it's going to be a heated vice presidential debate, because there was a lot left on the table in the presidential debate with the way President Biden performed tonight.
And Gerard, what do you think of that, especially given how close they have been polling in the polls, as in President Biden and former President Trump? What does Trump's VP candidate have to bring to get some of those undecided independent voters?
Something different, something that is not already what Trump offers. That's why you will see people like Ramaswamy. I don't think that that's a person who's going to be the vice presidential pick, because he's a mini Trump. There's nothing new there. You do have people like Elise Stefanik, on the other hand, who we all saw her performance on the House Committee on Education and the Workforce hearings, a pit bull who can go down on things and is much more focused on the facts and the details and policy than Trump is. That's someone who would augment his agenda. And she also speaks well to rural New Yorkers and rural communities in general. So I think that's a good pick, for example, who adds something new and different.
But you also, the issue may be as well, though, maybe a pit bull isn't the person you want to pair with the pit bull of Donald Trump, unless former President Trump is going to take on this persona for the next 4 years. You know, if he gets elected, you may want to have somebody that's a little more reserved, like a Tim Scott or somebody like that, who can be seen as the calm one or the steady one. I don't know if having two pit bulls in a cage together is the way to go.
We may be putting the cart before the horse. If the vice presidential debate is after the Democratic convention, talk to us about the possibility. There were rumblings that there could be a new candidate that emerges, and now after this, is that a real possibility?
For the Democratic presidential position? I think it's too late. I think
at the convention.
I think the Democratic Party, and not too late procedurally, I just think too late. How do you convince the country to get behind a new candidate in 2 months, right? Mail-in voting starts very soon. So now you have to introduce someone to the country and say, this person is capable of being your leader. We've had them in hiding for the last year and a half during this campaign process, but now we want you to pivot completely and get behind this new person. How do you do that with such short time left? I think not procedurally, but just realistically, the Democratic Party has missed their opportunity to replace President Joe Biden with another candidate. That should have been what happened. He should have endorsed somebody. He should have had them working beside him for the last 6 months, attending meetings with him, attending foreign hearings and things like that, where he shows that they're capable and they're ready. He didn't do that. Now it's too late with, 3 or 4 months before the election happens.
I think there may be a few people in the Democratic Party who are known enough and experienced enough to step in and still garner votes in that short amount of time. A very unique set of circumstances. But I think you're right. It's too late to switch candidates on the top line ticket. And part of that is, even if the Democrats do, it shows that they weren't planning this. It tells their base that they don't really know what they're doing, that they were running a candidate they should have been worried about and had no succession planning. So really the only option is Joe Biden, or he steps down and Kamala Harris, who's already the vice president and could be on the ticket. Someone else would just cause problems and you get less Democrats coming out.
And Gerard, there's no doubt that the country is more polarized than ever. So going forward, no matter what happens, what the result is, what do both candidates need to do as they continue to campaign to make sure, no matter what the result is, that America does not become more fractured come January?
Well, that's a tough question, isn't it? I don't think that there is a good answer that I can give, because I don't see those fractures healing in time for this election. We still have criminal trials that are being fought. We still have this issue haunting us day after day. I don't see Donald Trump sitting down with Joe Biden, shaking hands and saying, let's all work together and make a better country. There's too much animosity on both sides for that to happen. I think we need to wait past this election. America will course correct, but it's going to be a process. It's not going to be now.
I have to agree with that. I don't know if the parties now can just come together, have a kumbaya moment before this election happens. That's really impossible, it seems to me, especially like you said, there are criminal prosecutions that are happening now that if former President Trump wins, we know will go away. So there's going to be a party who says that he's using that and using his office to pardon himself, and that's something that should not happen. So I don't know if this go round we're going to be able to unite. I do think what both parties can do, and we talked about this earlier, is say we believe in our system. So no matter who wins, we believe in our system. I think that will go a long way, even if they're not necessarily holding hands, but if at the end they say, listen, I ran my campaign, you guys voted, you guys decided, and we're going to live with that.
And that concludes our debate night special coverage of The Nation Decides.
We want to thank our guests and viewers for joining us on this very important night.
I'm Steve Lance.
And I'm Tiffany Meier.
From all of us here at NTD, have a great night. And remember, stay informed and always seek the truth.